Hey Owen, how are you?
I'm agreeing to the recording. I'm doing good, Jeff. Thanks.
What? This is being recorded? God. Thanks for
Recall.
joining me on.
Yes. Yeah. You got it, man.
We're off to a great start. Thanks for joining me on Indispensable Appraisers podcast. So, give me a quick summary of who is Owen? What do you do? Where do you work? Tell me about your nice clothes.
Question I ask myself every day. So I am technically my title is the Pinellas County Market President for the Bank of Tampa, which is Tampa Bay's oldest and largest community bank. But I am also responsible footprint wide for commercial real estate as well as the marketing department.
Cool. And what's fun for me, obviously your friend as well, is to interview somebody that's not in the valuation space. So it's always insightful to someone that uses appraisers, appraisals, and can have a different perspective on our industry. So I'm going to ask, first question is from especially from an outsider standpoint, what do you think the valuation industry is winning at? What are we doing a good job on?
So I feel like the accuracy of appraisals are improving, and I'm assuming it's as a result of there's a lot more automation and data gathering, more real time data. There's use of data analytics. So I think the overall quality and the information that we're getting within the appraisals are getting better. And I know you asked me where you're winning, but with that, I would also hope and kind of think that like speed would come with that as well as cost efficiencies. And really after COVID, I mean, prices went up. We haven't seen any prices come down, and speed is not getting any better. But I'm hoping with all the advancements in technology that it's around the corner.
Let's talk about speed. What's a typical turnaround for commercial?
I'd say probably 3 weeks ish, sometimes longer. I mean, back before we had technology, I mean, you may have had to pay extra for it, but I feel like it was a little bit more common to get a commercial appraisal within anywhere 2 weeks to a month. That's kind of the standard. So, I mean, I feel like we're right in kind of 3 to 4 weeks, and that's held pretty consistent ever since COVID.
Cool, cool. And you said that you saw the reports are improving. What do you mean by that? Like what's improving?
I think the just the quality of the comps. I think some of the data regarding some of the lease information that we get. I think just the a little bit more of real time data. It feels like in some instances, although I know appraisals are often a little bit more historical looking, but I just feel like some of the comps and info is just a little more current, a little better.
Cool. And what do you think is the greatest challenges to the valuation space?
I think the general lack of appraisers. I mean, we talked about during the pandemic, just the great resignation. I mean, that was real, and I feel like if any industry was hit hard, it was the appraisal industry. Anybody who was in their mid to late 60s, I felt like they retired or they sold to one of the larger shops. I think there's certainly a lack of younger workers that are interested in the profession. Regulatory change is always a challenge, and being in banking, I mean, we share that, and that's always some level of frustration. Litigation, so litigation, which is real, but I think also the fear of litigation it can be a challenge in the appraisal industry. I would also say tech. As much as tech has been good, I do wonder how much of a disruptor it will be, because with CoStar and Yardi Matrix, I mean, they have great real time information, and I know CoStar does some surveying, and so sometimes the information is not quite as good. It's just, garbage in, garbage out in some instances, but data and the ability to put that into directly into a report and have some automation. I think it could have some disruptive impacts, but I would also say, I mean, you may recall you were in the business in the '90s. That was the fear in the '90s that technology is going to replace all appraisers and the industry was going to die. And so what I believe will happen is that that technology is going to take the place of the appraisers that left, and there'll probably be some additional consolidation. But I think the overall product will be better, and we'll just have less appraisers doing appraisal work.
On the tech side, do you think, and how does it affect
No,
banking
I
as
lost
well?
lost volume.
Oh, you lost volume? I hear you fine.
It's ruining the the pod. It's
That's okay.
Okay, good.
That's so funny. We talk about technology and we had to yeah, change equipment. So you
Tech
mentioned
fail.
tech fail. You mentioned technology. Do you see AI in the valuation space and or banking?
I see heavily in both. I think it's interesting, especially banking. So, well, both of our industries are highly regulated. I think banking probably a little bit more so. So it's going to be interesting to see what the path is for AI in banking. But certainly, I think it's going to change the world, like the internet, like the iPhone, and I think in ways that we just can't fully quite grasp yet. But yes, very much. We're
And
trying to
as a
figure it out.
gotcha. And as somebody who relies on appraisals, what would you say to if you could talk to the entire industry that, hey, I'd love to see more of this and less of that?
Communication. I mean, we need to be able to free up the appraiser's ability to communicate with the borrower, with the lender. And I've got a great example of that right now. So we had an appraisal that now it was a vacant building, or they had a month-to-month tenant that was vacating. They had a prospective tenant that they were bringing in, and the negotiated terms, although we didn't have a formalized signed lease, it happened just before closing, was $27 triple net, and they were going to do some capex. The appraiser never had a conversation with anybody beyond just the bank, who our appraisal department. And when the appraisal came back, it was $27 modified gross. He didn't include the capex, and so it's like we get a report, and we're like, this wasn't the assignment. So, I mean, a simple conversation would have prevented all that, but just the ability to communicate. I mean, borrowers have information, bankers have information. That information, unfortunately, doesn't always get to the bank appraisal department, and the ability to have those conversations freely would just improve the process, the product.
I've heard Doringer Hearn's pretty good. You might want to check those guys out.
A pretty decent job. They're on
You
our
meant
approved list.
so you mentioned younger workers. Obviously, that's a challenge in our space, but what about in your space? Is it a challenge in the banking industry?
Yeah, we have. I think the younger workers are finally coming in, but where we had an issue is we've got a whole generational gap. We didn't train bankers for 15 years, so we've got folks that in their 60s down to kind of my generation was the last that kind of came in. So I'm 45. I think there's a gap between. There's not a lot of 30-year-olds in banking, so we're getting the 20-year-olds, but we've got a whole gap that we're going to have to account for at some point in time when we've got leadership changes.
There's also not bankers with very large biceps like yourself.
This is true. I get up early. I'm not always spending time at the gym.
Nice. So if you looking in the future, where do we go from here? From you mentioned communication, you mentioned technology, you mentioned younger workers. If you were the CEO of the Appraisal Institute, what would you communicate to the valuation space of, hey, focus on these areas. This is the future.
I mean,
We're-
yes. Focus
That's the
on
pod. Thanks.
technology.
Thanks for joining me, Owen.
We need to recruit younger workers. Um,
Let's talk
yeah,
about communication. So, with Dodd-Frank, are appraisers allowed to talk to your lenders?
So there's a lot of gray area in that, as you know, and every bank interprets that, I think, a little differently. And I feel that most appraisers are concerned, and bankers probably more so, concerned about just adhering to that and risk adverse and worried about litigation. So they opt for not allowing that communication to take place. And again, I just think it's doing a disservice to the industry, the relationship, and I think the quality of the product.
Right. Well, I know we kind of pinged all over the place, but I really appreciate your time.
Enjoyed it, man. So sorry about the technology issues.
That no worries. I'm excited that you signed up for a marathon. I love fellow runners. So when does your race come? Where and when is your race?
Labor Day and going to Switzerland, Interlaken.
Wow. Ooh, you have hills and mountains? Wow.
We're, we're 16 miles of it's through hills, and the last 10 is in a mountain.
Wow.
So just doing it in Florida, apparently where it's flat, wasn't difficult enough for my wife.
Well, good luck on that.
I appreciate it, man.
All right. Thanks, Owen.
Thanks, Jeff.